Jordan Ellis picked up the butter knife from the table, slowly, deliberately, and set it down in front of Victor Whitmore with a sound so quiet it silenced the entire restaurant. He leaned forward, just slightly, enough for Victor to feel it. "Mock me again," Jordan said. "I dare you." Nobody breathed, because something in his eyes told everyone in that room that the man standing behind that waiter's uniform had already survived something Victor Whitmore never could. But what nobody knew yet, not even Jordan, was that this moment would unravel a secret powerful enough to bring a billion-dollar empire to its knees. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and follow the channel so you never miss what happens next. The Friday night shift at Bellevue Crown started the way it always did, with pressure dressed up as elegance. White tablecloths, crystal stemware, the smell of money marinated in ambition. The kind of restaurant where the menu didn't list prices because if you had to ask, you weren't supposed to be there. Jordan Ellis had worked the floor here for 3 years. He knew every inch of it, the way the light caught the chandelier above table 7 around 8:15, the way the sommelier's voice dropped half an octave when he was nervous about a wine selection, the way the kitchen manager, Luis, exhaled through his nose when the ticket printer got too loud. Jordan knew things. He always had. That was the part nobody bothered to notice. He moved between tables the way a man moves when he's made peace with being invisible, smooth, efficient, there and gone. He refilled water glasses without being asked. He remembered that the couple at table 4 had celebrated their anniversary here 2 years running. He knew that the older gentleman at table 11 always ordered the halibut, but actually wanted the salmon, and if you just brought him the salmon without saying anything, he tipped 30%. Details. Jordan lived in details. His uniform was pressed but old. The collar showed its age in a way that no amount of starch could fully hide. His shoes were polished to the limit of what polish could do for leather that had walked 10,000 miles. He wore a simple watch, black face, no brand name visible from a distance. His hands, large and steady, moved with a kind of quiet precision that came from years of doing the same thing until doing it well became the only point. I was 38 years old. He looked like a man who had been through something, not broken, just shaped. "Jordan." The voice came from behind the service station. It was Denise, one of the newer servers, barely 22, still rattled by demanding guests. They seated a party at table 16, 2 guests. Manager flagged them as VIP. Jordan looked up from the tray he was organizing. "Which kind of VIP?" he asked. Denise wrinkled her nose. "The kind where Marcus personally walked them in." Marcus was the floor manager. Marcus only personally walked in guests when the reservation was tied to significant money or significant trouble. Sometimes both. Jordan straightened his jacket. "I'll take it." "You sure? I heard they asked for the senior server." "That's me." He picked up his notepad and walked toward table 16. Victor Whitmore was the kind of man who filled a room without filling it with anything good. He sat at the table the way a man sits when he believes furniture exists, to confirm his importance. One arm rested on the back of the chair beside him, his wife Claire's chair. Not because he was relaxed, but because spreading himself physically was something he did without thinking, like a flag planted in territory. I was 61, silver at the temples, a jaw that had probably once been athletic and now just looked expensively maintained. He wore a watch that cost more than Jordan's car. He wore it the way men wear things when they want other people to calculate the number. Claire Whitmore sat beside him, 58, elegant in the careful way of someone who had learned early in life that appearance was armor. She had intelligent eyes that she kept deliberately soft, an old habit from years of navigating powerful rooms alongside an even more powerful husband. She held her wine glass by the stem and said very little. Between them, a younger man, late 30s, European suit tablet, resting near his bread plate, was laying out documents. A business associate named Garrett, who spoke in bullet points and only made eye contact with Victor. Jordan approached the table. "Good evening. Welcome to Bellevue Crown." He set the menus down with practiced ease. "My name is Jordan. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with still or sparkling water?" Victor didn't look up from the document Garrett was showing him. "Sparkling," he said. "Of course." Jordan turned to Claire. "Still, please," she said quietly. She glanced at him briefly, the kind of glance that acknowledges the person rather than just the function. "Thank you," Jordan nodded. "I'll give you a moment with the menu." He came back within 2 minutes. Victor was talking. Jordan waited at a respectful distance as he always did because interrupting a guest mid-sentence was not something he did. Victor didn't stop talking. Jordan waited. 45 seconds. Then a minute. He was accustomed to this. Some people needed to feel the weight of being waited on. Jordan didn't take it personally. He took it as information. Finally, Victor waved a hand without turning his head. "The Wagyu, rare, and tell the kitchen not to drown it in sauce this time." "Yes, sir. How would you like your sides?" "I don't care. The chef knows what goes with it." "Very good." Jordan turned to Claire. "Ma'am." Claire looked at the menu for just another second, genuinely considering not performing consideration. "I'll have the sea bass, with the roasted vegetables, please." She paused. "And could we get some extra bread, the sourdough, if you have it?" "Absolutely," Jordan said. Garrett ordered the lamb without looking up from his tablet. Jordan collected the menus and moved. The first 2 hours were professional. Unremarkable in the way that good service is supposed to be unremarkable, a machine running so smoothly you only notice the gears if they stop. Jordan brought the bread. He brought the appetizers. He checked on the table at 10-minute intervals, refilling glasses, adjusting the placement of plates, answering questions about preparation with the quiet authority of someone who actually knew the menu beyond its surface. Victor drank. That was the thing about men like Victor. Not that they drank too much necessarily, but that drinking loosened whatever restraint they carried into the room. And Victor Whitmore hadn't come into this restaurant with much restraint to begin with. The second bottle of Burgundy arrived. The business conversation with Garrett grew louder, more performative. Victor laughed at his own observations a beat before anyone else did. And then just past 9 o'clock, something shifted. Jordan had come to the table to remove the appetizer plates when Victor stopped mid-sentence and looked at him. Really looked. The kind of look that was less about seeing another person and more about arranging them in your mind according to your own filing system. "How long you been doing this?" Victor asked. Jordan held the plate steady. "A while, sir." "How long is a while?" "About 3 years at this restaurant." Victor leaned back. He glanced at Jordan's shoes, then back up. "You enjoy it." "I find meaning in it," Jordan said carefully. Victor smiled in a way that wasn't a smile. That's what people say when the real answer isn't something they can say out loud. Jordan said nothing. He reached for the last plate. "Those shoes," Victor said, nodding downward. "They've seen better days, friend." The table went quiet. Not just their table. The sound at the 2 nearest tables softened the way it does when something in the air changes. Jordan looked down briefly, then back up. "They work," he said. "That's what matters." "Sure," Victor said, leaning forward now, warming to something that apparently amused him. "Sure, that's the thing to say." He glanced at Garrett with a half grin. "You hear that they work." Then back to Jordan. "How old are you, 40? 38. 38. Victor nodded as if he were filing something away. "And still carrying plates. Don't take this wrong, but where does a man end up at 38 carrying plates in a suit like that?" Claire put down her wine glass. It made a precise little sound. "Victor." "What?" He waved a hand at her. "I'm just making conversation. Guy's been running back and forth all night. I'm just curious about the life. That's not wrong." She looked at Jordan. Her expression held something not quite apology, but something close to it. Awareness, maybe. Jordan's face was still. He removed the final plate from the table. "Can I bring you anything else?" he said. "Yeah," Victor said. "Bring me a little honesty. Straight up, no chaser." He leaned in like he was about to share a secret, and the whole room was his audience. 38 years old, working a dinner rush on a Friday night in a restaurant where the cheapest bottle of wine costs more than what you probably make in a week. He paused. "How many more years you figure before you can afford to sit at one of these tables instead of standing next to one?" The restaurant went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that happens gradually, the kind that drops like a curtain. A woman 2 tables over set down her fork. A man near the window pretended to check his phone but wasn't looking at it. The sommelier halfway across the floor stopped walking. Jordan did not move immediately. He held the stack of appetizer plates, a weight he'd been carrying all night, a weight he'd been carrying for years, and he stood there in the silence Victor Whitmore had just carved out of the air. And then slowly he placed the plates on the service cart beside the table. He reached over and picked up the butter knife that was resting on the bread plate, set it down in a different position, angled slightly differently, just to have something to do with his hands, just to measure his own control. He looked at Victor, not down, not sideways, directly, and he said it. "Mock me again. I dare you." His voice was not raised. It was not small. It was the voice of a man who had chosen very deliberately in the space of 3 seconds exactly how much of himself to let into the room. Victor blinked. Claire looked at Jordan with something entirely new in her expression. Garrett stopped typing. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Jordan counted without meaning to. Then Victor laughed. But it was the wrong kind of laugh, the kind that doesn't come from amusement, but from needing to fill space quickly before the space fills itself with something worse. "Easy there," Victor said, holding up a hand like he was calling off a dog. "I'm just messing around. Man can't take a joke." Jordan didn't blink. "There was no joke, sir. I didn't mean anything by it." "That's the part I'm aware of," Jordan said. "The fact that you didn't mean anything by it." He let that sit. Then he picked up the service cart. "I'll check on you in a few minutes," he said. "Enjoy your dinner." And he walked away. He did not look back. He did not rush. He walked with the same pace and the same posture he'd used all evening, because he had decided a long time ago that the way you move when someone is watching you is the only true measure of whether you've actually made peace with yourself. He pushed through the kitchen door. Luis, the kitchen manager, was plating something at the pass when Jordan came in. He looked up at his face and put down his spoon. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Jordan said. "What happened?" Guest made a comment. "Bad." Jordan set the plates down on the rack, the kind that tells you everything you need to know about somebody in 30 seconds. Luis looked at him for a moment longer. "You want me to have Marcus?" "No," Jordan said. "I'm fine. I just needed 30 seconds of non-performance." Luis studied him. Then he nodded. 30 seconds then. Clock's running." Jordan stood still. He breathed. He thought about Amara, which was where his mind always went when the world got heavy. His daughter, 9 years old, probably asleep by now, staying with his neighbor Mrs. Calloway, who had a soft spot for kids and a refrigerator full of things no nutritionist would approve. Amara would be up when he got home regardless. She always was. She'd have her tablet and one of those mystery books she was suddenly obsessed with, and she'd look up at him with those wide eyes and say, "Dad, you look tired," and then refuse to go to sleep until he told her something good that had happened. "I was going to have to think of something good." "Time's up," Luis said quietly. Jordan straightened. "Back at it." He walked back out onto the floor. Table 16 was finishing their main course when Marcus approached Jordan near the service station. Marcus was a compact man, 45, the kind of floor manager who'd learned the restaurant business from the ground up and treated competence the way some people treated prayer, with real devotion. He kept his voice low. "I got a complaint," he said. Jordan kept his eyes on the floor, monitoring. "From 16. "From Whitmore, yeah. He said you were rude to him." "Did he describe the conversation?" "He said you spoke to him in a way that was inappropriate for a server." Jordan looked at Marcus directly. "He asked me how long before I could afford to sit at his table, in front of the restaurant. Several guests heard it." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I know. Because Denise told me, and because I pulled up the camera angle near 16. He paused. "I saw enough." Jordan waited. "I'm not writing you up," Marcus said, "and I'm not moving you to another station. But I want you to finish the table professionally, and then we can talk after close." "I was going to finish the table professionally regardless," Jordan said. "I know that too." Marcus started to walk away, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "you're the best server I've got. I don't say that enough." He kept walking. Jordan watched him go. He brought the dessert menu to table 16. Victor was on his phone. Garrett was packing his documents into a leather briefcase with the efficiency of a man who was already somewhere else in his mind. Claire was the only one who looked up when Jordan approached. "We brought the dessert selections," Jordan said. "Tonight's special is a dark chocolate torte with espresso cream. We also have—" "Just the check," Victor said without looking up. "Of course, I'll bring that right over. And get me another glass of the burgundy while I wait. The good one, not whatever that was in the second pour." Jordan paused for just a fraction of a second. "I'll double-check the label with the sommelier to make sure we match your preference exactly." "That's what you should have done the first time." Jordan said nothing. He turned. "You know," Victor said, and there it was again, that loosened restraint, that second wind of performance. "I'm going to put in a word with management tonight before we leave, about the service, and about the attitude." Jordan stopped walking. He didn't turn around immediately. He stood with his back to the table for exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, he made a choice. He turned. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his voice even and clear, and carrying no more or less weight than it needed to. "I've served you and your guests this entire evening with the same professionalism I bring to every table. What you decide to communicate to management is entirely your right." He paused. "But before you do, I'd ask you to think carefully about what you want to say and what you're willing to have repeated." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "No," Jordan said, "it's information. I went to the service station, pulled the check, brought it to the table without another word, and spent the remainder of the shift moving through the restaurant with the quiet efficiency of a man who had closed a door very firmly and had no intention of reopening it." The restaurant cleared by 11:15. Jordan rolled silverware at the back station the way he always did at the end of a shift, because rolling silverware was meditative, repetitive. It gave his hands something to do and gave his mind permission to settle. Denise sat down across from him. She looked young in the way that people look young when they haven't been required to carry anything heavy yet. "Did that really happen tonight?" she said. "Yes," Jordan said. "He actually said all that about your shoes, and he did." She was quiet for a moment. "And you just said, what did you say? I didn't hear exactly." Jordan folded a fork into a napkin. "I told him to mock me again." Denise blinked. "And then what?" "And then I went and got his dessert menu." She stared at him. "That's it. That's it." "But how do you—" She stopped, tried again. "I would have been shaking. I would have cried or said something I regretted. How do you just—" Jordan set down the silverware. He looked at her for a moment. The way he looked at things, not past them, not above them, but directly at them, like the thing in front of him was the only thing that required his attention. Because, he said, getting loud with someone who's already making a scene only gives the scene more air. And that man needed oxygen. I wasn't going to be the one to provide it. Denise thought about that. "But doesn't it bother you?" "Of course it does." "Then how—" "Because bothered isn't the same as defeated," Jordan said. "He embarrassed himself tonight. I just happened to be standing there." She was quiet again. "I have a daughter," Jordan said, going back to the silverware. "She's 9. Every single day she's watching how I handle things, how I handle hard things, easy things, small things, big things. And one day she's going to be in a room where someone tries to make her feel like she's small. And the only defense I can give her is the example I've been setting since she was old enough to watch." He looked up. "So no, I don't have the luxury of losing myself in somebody else's bad behavior, not with her watching." Denise didn't say anything else. She just nodded very slowly, the way young people nod when they've heard something they know will matter to them later, but can't entirely measure yet. Jordan drove home through Chicago at 11:45. The city was still at its edges, that quiet loud that cities get when the main noise pulls back and you start to hear the layers underneath. A bus pulling away from a stop. The distant thump of music from a bar still open. Rain coming eventually, he could feel it. He parked in front of his building, sat in the car for a minute. Just a minute. He thought about Victor Whitmore, not with anger. Anger was a fire that consumed the person holding it more reliably than the thing it was aimed at, and Jordan had made peace with that truth years ago. He thought about him the way you think about rain when you're already carrying an umbrella, with a kind of removed clarity. Victor Whitmore was a man who had built his entire identity on the idea that money was a language and whoever had the most of it was always the one speaking. Jordan had met those men before. He had sat across from them at conference tables in a previous life, and he had watched them try to negotiate reality into a shape that confirmed their self-image, and he had understood even then that the power they displayed was always performing for an internal audience. The insults tonight weren't really about Jordan. They were Victor trying to be large in a room where he felt for some reason like he needed to be larger. That didn't make them acceptable, but it made them understandable. And Jordan had decided a long time ago that understanding something was more useful than resenting it. He went upstairs. The apartment was small and clean in the way of places that are organized by someone who doesn't have excess. A kitchen with everything in its place. A living room where a secondhand couch faced a window that looked out over the street. A child's artwork framed on the wall, 3 pieces each labeled in Amara's careful printing, Dad making breakfast, Dad reading, Dad at work. That last one showed a stick figure in a white jacket carrying a tray. Beneath it in red crayon, My dad is good at his job. Jordan had laughed when she gave it to him. Then he'd framed it. The lamp in the corner was on Amara's signal that she was still awake and deniably asleep. He walked to her door and pushed it open. She was in bed. The mystery book was on the pillow beside her. Her eyes were closed with the transparent performance of someone who had been practicing falling asleep for approximately 30 seconds. Jordan sat on the edge of her bed. I know you're awake, he said. A pause. Then, how do you always know you're breathing? When you're actually asleep, your breathing is slower. She opened one eye. That's unfair. I can't control my breathing. You can practice. Did you practice? At your age, yes. Your grandfather could always tell, too. She considered this. Then, how was work? Work was work. Was anything good? She was already sitting up slightly because this was the ritual. This was what she waited for. Jordan thought about it. He thought about Marcus saying he didn't say it enough. He thought about Denise's face when she listened. He thought about Claire Whitmore's eyes when she first looked at him, that small, real acknowledgement. He thought about the silence after he said what he said. A man tonight tried to make me feel like I was nothing, Jordan said. Amara was fully awake now, both eyes open, watching him. What did he do? He mocked what I was wearing. He questioned what I was doing with my life. He did it in front of other people. Her face changed. The way a child's face changes when someone they love has been hurt, that fierce, uncomplicated protectiveness. What did you say? I told him to do it again. I dared him. She stared at him. And then what? And then I went and got his dessert menu. Amara blinked. Then she made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. Dad? What? That's amazing, he smiled. That means you weren't scared of him? Jordan looked at his daughter. No, he said. I wasn't scared of him. She settled back against her pillow. Good, because you're the best waiter there is, and if he couldn't see that, then he's just dumb. He's not dumb, Jordan said. He's just a man who has a lot of things and has convinced himself that things are the same as worth. She thought about that. That's sad. It is, Jordan agreed. She was quiet a moment. Then, did he tip? Jordan laughed, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere that hadn't been tense all evening. No, he said. He did not tip. Definitely dumb, Amara said, entirely satisfied with this conclusion. Jordan leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Go to sleep, he said. Dad, yeah, you're not nothing. He stood up. He straightened the blanket at the edge of her bed. I know, he said. Get some sleep. He walked to the door, turned off the light, stood in the doorway for just a second looking at his daughter in the dark, this small, fierce person who had cost him everything and given him the only thing that had ever really mattered. Dad, she said again. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Sleep. He pulled the door mostly closed and went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter. The apartment was quiet around him. Outside, the city kept moving. Somewhere out there, Victor Whitmore was in a hotel suite or a penthouse or a car, being driven somewhere by someone whose name he probably didn't know, and he was probably already not thinking about the waiter he'd insulted. People like Victor didn't carry those moments. They didn't have to. That was part of the privilege. But Jordan carried something too. He carried the look on people's faces when they felt seen instead of served, the weight of plates lifted perfectly, the memory of a 9-year-old girl framing a crayon drawing and hanging it next to her other art because it was art because her father was worth displaying. He carried a life built on what remained when everything else was stripped away. He carried the truth about himself. And the truth was this. Once, not so very long ago, Jordan Ellis had sat at tables like the ones he now served. He'd sat at them and argued about market projections and distribution chains and venture rounds and the kind of future that could be measured in stock price and board votes and revenue per quarter. He had built something from nothing, really, from nothing, from a yellow legal pad and a whiteboard and 3 years of 18-hour days, and it had become something that the whole world now used without knowing his name. He had walked away from it, Not because he'd failed, because when his daughter was sick, really sick, the kind of sick that changes the shape of your entire life in 24 hours, there was only one calculation that mattered, and he had made it without hesitation and without regret. He had sold his shares, he had paid for her treatment, he had chosen her. The people who bought those shares had gone on to enormous wealth. The company had become something that appeared in headlines and on the covers of business magazines and in the portfolios of investors whose names were known internationally. Jordan's name had not appeared. He had not sought recognition. He had not filed complaints. He had found an apartment, found a restaurant that was hiring, found a school that Amara liked, rebuilt his mornings and his evenings around the rhythm of a life that, while quieter, felt true in a way that the previous life, for all its money and its urgency, sometimes hadn't. He was not bitter. That was the thing people would not understand later when the truth of him came out. They would expect bitterness. They would look for it because in most stories about men who've lost significant wealth and prestige, bitterness is the engine, the thing that drives the narrative forward. But Jordan Ellis wasn't bitter. He was something harder to classify and far more dangerous to underestimate. He was patient. He was grounded. And on a Friday night in Chicago, in a restaurant where a man with a very expensive watch had tried to reduce him to a pair of worn shoes and a question about aspirations, Jordan Ellis had done something that took more control and more self-knowledge than Victor Whitmore would ever understand. He had looked the wolf in the eye and not run, and the wolf had blinked first. He finished his water, he rinsed the glass, he went to bed, and in the morning he would get up and make his daughter breakfast and walk her to school and come home and read for an hour and then go back to the restaurant and do it all again, because that was the life he had chosen, and he had chosen it completely. But somewhere across the city, in a hotel suite with a view of Lake Michigan, Claire Whitmore was sitting in an armchair with her phone in her hand and a look on her face that her husband, already asleep, had not seen in a very long time. She was thinking about the waiter, about his eyes, about the way he had said those 5 words, "Mock me again." I dare you, with the absolute stillness of someone who knew exactly who he was. She opened her laptop. She typed a name into the search bar. Jordan Ellis, Chicago. And then she waited to see what the internet knew about a man who she was already beginning to suspect was considerably more than anyone in that restaurant had been allowed to see. The results came back slowly, then all at once, and Claire Whitmore stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds, because what she found changed everything. She thought she understood about the evening, about the insults about the company her husband had built, and about the man who had been carrying their dinner plates. Claire Whitmore had a rule she'd kept for 23 years of marriage. She didn't investigate her husband's enemies, not because she lacked the intelligence or the access she had both in abundance, but because she had learned early and painfully that knowing too much about the people Victor considered beneath him only led to a kind of grief she had no container for. It was easier to look away, easier to keep the wine glass in hand and the eyes soft and let the world Victor constructed around himself remain intact. She had kept that rule for 23 years. She broke it at 12:47 in the morning, sitting in the armchair of their suite at the Langham with her husband's breathing, coming slow and even from the bedroom and the lights of Chicago spread out below her like scattered evidence. The search results for Jordan Ellis had come back in stages, the way important things sometimes did, starting with the surface layer, the ordinary records, the thin public outline of a man living a quiet life, a home address in Pilsen, an employment record at Bellevue Crown, a few mentions in a local community newsletter about a fundraiser, nothing that would explain why her chest had tightened when she typed his name, nothing that would justify the feeling she'd carried out of the restaurant, that specific unease of a woman who had witnessed something she could not yet name but knew she would eventually have to reckon with. She scrolled. She had always been better at research than people assumed. Victor got credit for the instincts, the aggression, the deal-making bravado. What people didn't know, what Victor himself had sometimes forgotten, was that Claire had spent the first decade of their marriage doing the background work, the due diligence, the quiet, methodical reading of documents that told you what a handshake couldn't. She went deeper. She moved past the residential records and into business archives. She tried variations, J. Ellis Jordan, A. Ellis Ellis Chicago Tech, and then on a narrower search through an old business database she still had access to from her years on 2 corporate boards, she found it. A filing from 11 years ago, a startup registered in Illinois, Ellis Integrated Systems, LLC. She stared at the name, then she cross-referenced it. The company had developed a proprietary logistics management platform, a system for real-time distribution optimization, that at the time of its creation was considered years ahead of anything else in the market. The trade publications that had covered it described it with the kind of breathless language reserved for things that genuinely change the operational architecture of an industry. Revolutionary, unprecedented scalability, the framework that will redefine supply chain intelligence. There were photographs in the archived articles. One of them showed a man standing at a whiteboard at a tech conference in 2014, young, 31 maybe, wearing a jacket that didn't quite fit right the way jackets don't when you buy them for an occasion and haven't gotten comfortable with the occasion yet. He was pointing at something on the whiteboard and talking, and even in a low-resolution archived image, his eyes had that quality she had noticed across a restaurant table a few hours earlier. Like he was the only one in the room who had read the whole document. She sat back. She picked up her glass of water, realized it was empty, set it back down. She kept reading. The company had filed for a significant equity change 18 months after that conference. A rapid sale, not a phased exit, not a strategic acquisition negotiated over months, but a sudden complete transfer of ownership interest at a price that, according to the archived valuation records, represented approximately 12% of what the technology would ultimately be worth. 12% for the whole thing. She knew what those kinds of rapid equity sales usually meant. They didn't mean failure. They meant emergency. They meant someone needed a large amount of money immediately and had only one thing large enough to sell. She went to medical records, not Jordan's, those weren't accessible, but she searched the timeline. She searched for what had happened in that window between the conference and the sale. It took 20 minutes of cross-referencing. She found a mention in a neighborhood blog, the kind of hyper-local Chicago community writing that captured things no mainstream outlet covered. A post from 2015 about a community fundraiser for a local family. The family's name wasn't used, but the context was specific enough. A child, a rare condition, significant medical costs, the neighborhood coming together. Claire sat very still. She thought about what she now knew in sequence. A man builds a technology from nothing, a technology that is genuinely transformative, genuinely valuable. His daughter becomes critically ill. He sells everything he's built, not at market rate, not at fair value, but at whatever he can get right now, because right now is the only timeline that matters when your child is sick. He disappears from the business world. He resurfaces 3 years later, working as a server at a high-end restaurant in Chicago. She thought about Victor's voice tonight. That particular register it took when he was performing for an audience louder than necessary, sharpened at the edges, calibrated to land. How many more years before you can afford to sit at this table? She closed the laptop. She sat for a very long time in the dark. Then she opened it again and typed a different search. She typed the name of Victor's company, and she searched for the acquisition history of Ellis Integrated Systems. And she followed the chain of ownership from that 2015 fire sale purchase through a series of corporate transactions that she tracked carefully, the way you track something you're not sure you want to find at the end. She found the end. The technology developed by Jordan Ellis, the framework, the architecture, the core intellectual property was currently embedded in a suite of operational tools that powered 3 of the 5 largest divisions of Whitmore Logistics International, her husband's company, her husband who had spent the evening mocking the man who built the foundation his empire sat on. Claire shut the laptop. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. She didn't cry. She wasn't the kind of woman who cried easily, and this wasn't the kind of moment that called for it. This was the kind of moment that called for thinking very carefully about what you did with the truth once you had it. She thought about Jordan's face when Victor leaned across the table, the absolute stillness, the controlled, deliberate placing of that butter knife. And then those 5 words with the voice of someone who had already decided long before tonight exactly what they were worth. She thought he already knew. Maybe not the specifics of how deeply his work had been absorbed into Whitmore Logistics. Maybe not the exact chain of transactions. But the fundamental understanding that the thing he had built had not disappeared when he sold it, that it had gone on to mean something enormous to someone, that understanding lived in him somewhere. She was sure of it. She sat with that until the city outside the window started to shift from night into the gray-blue of very early morning. Then she got up, went to the desk, and started writing down everything she had found. Not in any digital format. On hotel stationery, by hand, because some information you needed to hold physically before you decided what to do with it. She wrote for 40 minutes. When she was finished, she folded the pages carefully and put them in the inner pocket of her coat. Then she went to bed. She didn't sleep. She lay beside her husband and stared at the ceiling and thought about 12%. 12% of what he was owed for his daughter's life. And the man who paid 12% was sleeping 3 feet away from her, breathing slowly, untroubled. She thought about tomorrow. She thought something has to be done. She didn't yet know that Victor was already making calls. Victor Whitmore woke at 6:45 the way he always did, with the immediate purposeful energy of a man who had never once in his adult life allowed morning to be gentle. He was dressed and on the phone before Claire had moved, and she lay still with her eyes open and listened to his end of the conversation. Not the point. The point is the optics. If the manager backs the employee in this kind of situation, it sets a precedent that no, listen to me. The name of the restaurant is Bellevue Crown. The manager's name is Marcus someone. I want it handled before end of business today. She kept her breathing even. Victor paced to the window. I'm not asking you to do anything dramatic. I'm asking you to make a call. One call. You know people. That's literally the purpose of right. Right, exactly. Thank you. He hung up. He turned and saw that her eyes were open. Morning, he said. Not warmly, but not coldly either. Victor operated in a register between those extremes most of the time, the flat, functional tone of a man who found emotional range inefficient. What was that about? Claire asked. Last night's unpleasantness. He moved to the closet, making sure it doesn't become anything. It already became something, she said carefully. You said what you said in front of a full restaurant. And nothing will come of it. He pulled out a shirt. Nobody photographs waiters. That's not really the point, is it? He paused, looked at her in the closet mirror. What's the point then, Claire? She sat up. The point is that you were unkind, publicly and in a way that didn't serve any purpose other than making yourself feel large in a room where you apparently needed to. A silence. Victor put on the shirt. I was having a conversation. You mocked his shoes. I was having a bad night. So was he by the end of it. Another silence. Longer this time. Victor buttoned the shirt with the practiced efficiency of a man who did not intend to extend this conversation. I'll send the restaurant a generous tip, he said. Through the manager, anonymously. That covers it. Claire looked at him. She thought about the hotel stationery in the inner pocket of her coat. She thought not yet. Not like this. Sure, she said. Okay. And she let it go, because she had learned 23 years in that there was a right moment and a wrong moment for everything. And 6:45 in the morning, with Victor already armored and purposeful, was definitively the wrong moment. She had things to do first. Marcus Teller had been managing restaurant floors for 19 years and had developed in that time a highly accurate internal alarm for the kind of trouble that arrived in expensive packaging. The call came at 9:15. It was from a man who identified himself as an associate of Mr. Victor Whitmore and who communicated in the polished and entirely deniable language of people who did things like this professionally, that the restaurant's ownership group, who happened to share an investment vehicle with a Whitmore-affiliated fund, would be very interested to know how an incident like last night's was being handled internally. Marcus listened to the whole thing. Then he said, "Thank you for letting me know," and hung up. He sat at his desk for a moment. Then he pulled up the security camera footage from table 16 on his laptop and watched it again. All of it. From the moment Jordan first approached the table to the moment he walked away with the service cart after saying what he said. Marcus had watched it 3 times already since the previous night. Each time he noticed something new. The first time he'd noticed how long Victor spoke before Jordan responded, how much silence Jordan absorbed without filling it incorrectly. The second time, he'd noticed Claire Whitmore's hands on the table, the way they tightened on her wine glass before she said her husband's name, and then the way they released when he dismissed her. The third time this time, he noticed something he'd missed before. After Jordan turned and walked away toward the kitchen, the camera caught the expressions of 4 other guests at nearby tables. A couple in their 60s, the man with a hand on his wife's arm as if to steady something. A woman dining alone who had put down her fork and was looking at the space where Jordan had been standing with an expression Marcus could only describe as recognition, the look of someone who had stood in that exact position before. He closed the laptop. He picked up the phone and called the restaurant owner. "Stephen," he said when it picked up, I needed to tell you about something that happened last night, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond to any calls you might receive today." There was a pause. Then, "All right," Marcus told him. He told him about the insults, about the shoes, about the question how many more years before you can afford to sit at this table, which he recited word for word because precision mattered. He told him about what Jordan said. He told him about the call that had come in an hour ago. Stephen listened without interrupting. "Do you want me to let Jordan go?" Marcus asked when he'd finished. "Because I won't do it. I want to be clear about that before this conversation goes further. I won't do it. But you're the owner and you have the right to—" "Marcus," Stephen said. "Yeah, stop talking." A breath. "Jordan stays," Stephen said. "And if Whitmore or anyone connected to him calls this restaurant again, you have my permission to tell them that the footage of the incident is already in the possession of our legal team and that we consider the matter closed on our end." Those exact words. Marcus let out a long breath. "Okay." "And Marcus?" "Yeah. Give Jordan a raise. Whatever you think is right. Do it this week." Marcus almost smiled. "Already wrote up the paperwork." He hung up. He sat for another minute. Then he texted Jordan. "Still have your shift tonight if you want it. No pressure either way. Your call." Jordan's reply came 3 minutes later. "I'll be there." Jordan did not think about Victor Whitmore all morning. I thought about him briefly while making Amara's breakfast, a flash of the man's face in that moment of social performance, the careless cruelty of it, and then the image dissolved because there were pancakes on the griddle, and Amara was telling him about a dream she'd had that involved a talking crow who ran a detective agency, and the crow's name was Gerald, and Gerald apparently solved crimes using only logic and strong opinions about cheese. "Gerald sounds like someone I'd like to know," Jordan said. "He's fictional, Dad." "People can know fictional people. I know Gerald quite well now." She gave him the look she'd been developing over the past year, part exasperation, part helpless affection, and ate her pancakes. He walked her to school. The morning was cool in that specific Chicago way where the coolness had presence, actual weight, the lake in it. Amara wore her green jacket and talked the whole way about the mystery book about Gerald, about a girl in her class named Priya who was also reading mysteries and who she was thinking about inviting over on Saturday. "You should invite her," Jordan said. "What if she doesn't like our apartment? Then she's not worth inviting." Amara laughed. "Dad, that's not how friendship works." "Sure it is. The right kind of friendship." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. At the school gate, she turned and hugged him, the fast, fierce hug of a 9-year-old who still did this without self-consciousness, and Jordan held it for the extra second that he always held it, because he knew there was a version of the future where this got more complicated, where the fierce, easy hug became something she had to think about, and he was not in any hurry to arrive there. "Have a good day," she said, pulling back. "Have a great one," he said. "Tell Gerald I said hello." She giggled and ran through the gate. He walked home. It was 11 in the morning when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, Chicago area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. He usually did with numbers he didn't know. Something made him answer. "Mr. Ellis." A woman's voice, controlled, precise, with the particular quality of someone managing their own uncertainty. "My name is Claire Whitmore. We met last night, though, under circumstances I'm not proud of." Jordan stood in his kitchen with the phone against his ear. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Mrs. Whitmore." "I know this is unusual," she said. "I got your contact information from the restaurant. I want to be transparent about that. I called and spoke with your manager, and I explained that I wanted to apologize directly. He gave me your number with your permission implied, but I should have asked first, and I'm sorry for that as well." Jordan moved to sit at the kitchen table. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Whitmore?" "I'm not calling for something I need from you," she said. "I want to be clear about that too. I'm calling because last night was not acceptable, and a message passed through a manager is not an apology. I owe you a direct one." He waited. "What my husband said to you was wrong," she said. "Not impolite, not tactless, wrong. He tried to diminish you in a public setting for no reason other than that he had had too much to drink and an audience. That is not the behavior of a decent person, and I sat there and said his name once and then let it continue, and that makes me complicit in it. I'm sorry." Jordan looked at the table in front of him, at the grain of the wood. "I appreciate that," he said. A pause. "There's something else," Claire said, And this is where I need you to understand that I'm not calling to make myself feel better. I'm calling because I found something last night that I don't think you know I know, and I think you deserve to know that someone knows." He went very still. "I did some research," she said carefully. "After we got back to the hotel, I found the company, Ellis Integrated Systems. I found the 2015 equity sale, and I found the chain of acquisition that brought your technology into the operational infrastructure of my husband's company." Silence. "Mr. Ellis," she said, "I know what you built, and I know what you gave it up for. And what happened to you last night was not just rude. It was the word I keep coming back to is obscene. That's the only word that fits." Jordan's hand on the phone was very steady. He had always been good at steadiness. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I appreciate your candor." "I want to help," she said, "whatever that looks like. Whether it's, I don't need help," he said, not harshly, simply. A beat. "I know you don't need it in the way I mean it. I know that. But I built what I built," Jordan said. "I sold it. That was my choice, and I would make it again. I don't wake up in the morning looking for someone to tell me I was wronged. I know what I chose, and I know what it was worth. What happened last night with your husband was unpleasant, but it doesn't change anything about my actual life." A longer silence. Then Claire said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Doesn't it make you angry that the technology is there right now, running inside a company, that your husband—" She stopped, started again. "That someone who would speak to you the way he did is benefiting from what you—" "Yes," Jordan said, simply. Without the pause she might have expected, without the measured consideration he might have used with someone else. "Yes," he said again. "Of course it does. It would make any person angry. The anger is real, and it's reasonable, and I don't pretend otherwise." Then, "But anger isn't a plan," Jordan said. "And I have a daughter to raise, and I've spent 3 years building a life that's mine, actually mine from the ground up with my own hands, in a way that the previous version of my life never quite was. And a man at a restaurant can't take that from me. Not even a man who unknowingly owes me a significant portion of his net worth." Claire was quiet. "What you found," Jordan said. "What do you intend to do with it?" Another pause. Then, "I don't know yet. That's honest." "Okay," Jordan said. "I think someone should know," she said. "The right people, in the right way, not for revenge, but because there's a version of this that matters. That should be on the record." Jordan said nothing. "Can I keep your number?" she asked. He thought about that, not for long. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, as she was about to end the call. "Yes, your apology was accepted. Whatever else happens, however you decide to handle what you found, that part is already done. You don't owe me anything past the apology." A very small sound on the other end of the line, not quite a breath, something smaller. "You're a remarkable person, Mr. Ellis," she said quietly. "I'm a waiter," he said. "I'm just a waiter who had a harder night than usual." He ended the call. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he got up, washed his breakfast dishes, and read for an hour a book about logistics, because old habits didn't entirely disappear. They just reshaped themselves into something personal instead of professional. And then he got ready for his shift. He put on his uniform. He polished his shoes to the limit of what polish could do. He looked at himself in the mirror. "I thought about what Claire Whitmore had said, the chain of acquisition that brought your technology into the operational infrastructure of my husband's company, and he let the full weight of it sit in his chest for exactly as long as it needed to. Then he put on his jacket. He went to work. Because Jordan Ellis had learned something in the years since he'd walked away from a world that kept scores in dollar amounts and equity percentages and boardroom approvals. He had learned that the right moment for anything only arrived if you were in the right position when it came. And the way you stayed in the right position was simple. You kept showing up. You kept doing the work. You kept being in every ordinary moment exactly the person you had decided to be. The right moment would come. It always did. And when it came for Jordan Ellis, he would be ready, because he had always been ready. That was the part about him that people like Victor Whitmore were constitutionally unable to understand. The man they saw carrying plates had never once stopped being the man who built systems. He had just been waiting for the right table. Victor Whitmore did not think about the waiter the next morning. He thought about him by noon. Not because guilt arrived on any kind of schedule with Victor. Guilt had never been particularly punctual in his life, but because the call he'd made at 6:45 had not produced the result he expected, and when things didn't produce expected results, Victor's mind circled back to the origin point, like a dog returning to a buried bone. The restaurant had not fired Jordan Ellis. His associate had called. The associate had communicated the appropriate level of pressure using the appropriate language, invoking the appropriate financial relationship. And the manager Marcus something had apparently said in the polished and entirely unmoved language of someone who had been told exactly what to say and by whom we consider the matter closed on our end. Victor's associate had relayed this to Victor. Victor had stared at his phone for a long moment. "What does that mean, closed on their end?" he asked. "It means they have the footage," his associate said carefully, "and they have a lawyer." "A restaurant has a lawyer. Most restaurants have lawyers, Victor." He'd hung up. He spent the next 2 hours in back-to-back meetings about the Chicago expansion of Whitmore Logistics, a deal that had been 18 months in the making, a regional consolidation that would absorb 3 mid-sized distribution operations and give Whitmore Logistics an almost complete lock on Midwest supply chain management. The meetings were productive, the numbers were good, the lawyers on both sides were satisfied. Victor was not satisfied. I was distracted in the particular way of a man who has thrown something and missed, and who cannot move forward until he throws again and doesn't miss. By 3 in the afternoon, he called Garrett. "I need background on the server," he said without preamble. Garrett was quiet for a moment. "The server from last night. How many servers do you think I'm thinking about?" "Victor. Not surveillance, not anything uncomfortable, just background, public record. I want to know who I was dealing with." Another pause. "I'll see what I can find. Today. I'll do my best." He hung up. He stood at the window of the temporary office space they'd reserved for the Chicago trip and looked at the city. His city in the way that all cities were his city. Every major American metropolitan area contained at least one building with a Whitmore Logistics operation in it, and that fact had become over years of repetition, something close to how Victor understood his own existence. He was woven into things. He was structural. He did not like the feeling of a loose thread. The waiter was a loose thread, not because of what he'd said, 5 words barely enough to constitute a sentence, and the man's tone had been so controlled it was almost insulting in its restraint, not because of what he represented, but because of the way the room had shifted when he said it, the way other guests had looked, the way Claire had looked. Victor had caught Claire's expression in the moment after, and it had been the expression she used for moments she was filing away. He knew that face. He had not been married to this woman for 23 years without learning to recognize when she was taking notes. He didn't know what notes she was taking. That bothered him more than anything else. Garrett called back at 5:17. "I found some things," Garrett said. His voice had a quality Victor didn't recognize immediately, a carefulness, a studied neutrality that wasn't Garrett's usual register. "Tell me." A breath. "His name is Jordan Amos Ellis, 38. He's been at the Bellevue Crown for about 3 years. Before that, about a year in what looks like transitional work, some part-time restaurant stuff, some community work. Before that," Garrett paused. "Before that, it gets more interesting." "How interesting?" "He had a company, Victor, a tech company, registered in Illinois 2012, Ellis Integrated Systems." Victor said nothing. "He built a logistics management platform," Garrett continued. "Between 2012 and 2015, the trade coverage at the time was significant. I'm looking at a piece from a business publication calling it, quote, the most sophisticated real-time distribution optimization system ever developed by an independent team." The window, the city, Victor's reflection in the glass. "What happened to the company?" Victor asked. His voice was very even. "Sold," Garrett said. 2015, rapid equity transfer, 1 buyer clean transaction well below market rate. Another pause. "The buyer was a holding company called Meridian Bridge Capital." Victor closed his eyes. He knew that name. Of course he knew that name. Meridian Bridge Capital had been one of 3 acquisition vehicles he'd used during the aggressive expansion period of 2014 to 2016. He hadn't managed those acquisitions directly. That was what corporate development teams were for, but he had signed off on the portfolio. He had reviewed the summary documents. He had not read the detail documents. He very rarely read the detail documents. "Garrett," Victor said. "Yeah." "Is Ellis Integrated Systems in the current operational stack?" a silence that lasted exactly long enough for Victor to understand that Garrett had already looked this up before the call. "The core architecture," Garrett said quietly. "The distribution optimization framework. It's in the base layer of the platform that runs the Midwest operations, and the Southeast Corridor, and 3 of the 5 regional hubs." He stopped. "It's not the only technology in the stack, obviously. There have been significant developments built on top of it over the years, but the underlying architecture is his." "Yes." Victor stood very still. Outside Chicago moved on in its efficient, layered, totally indifferent way. "He doesn't know," Victor said. "Not a question, a position." Garrett was quiet. "Does he know?" Victor asked sharper now. "I don't know what he knows," Garrett said. "I know that his name was removed from the attribution records during the integration process. That's standard for acquisitions. You're buying IP, not employment history. But whether he tracked what happened to the technology after the sale, find out if he knows." "Victor, I'm not sure that's—" "Garrett." A pause. "I'll look into it. And I need to know if there's any legal exposure here. Quietly, very quietly. Not through our main counsel, through the firm we use for sensitive matters. I'll set it up." Victor hung up. He sat down for the first time in hours. He sat and he thought, not with the performance of thinking that he used in boardrooms, but with the actual uncomfortable grinding machinery of a mind working through something it didn't want to work through. He was a man who had built an empire on a technology he had not known until 45 minutes ago had been created by a person who was at this moment carrying dinner plates in a restaurant 4 miles away. He was a man who had publicly mocked that person. He was a man who had woken up this morning and told his wife that sending an anonymous tip would cover it. He sat with all of that. And then, because Victor Whitmore had not built an empire by sitting too long with things that made him uncomfortable, he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked into the adjacent room where his assistant was waiting with the evening schedule. "Move the 7 o'clock, he said. "I'm going to need the evening." He needed to think. He needed to plan. What he did not need, he told himself, what he absolutely could not afford, was for this to become anything other than a manageable private situation. I was wrong about that, but he wouldn't understand how wrong for another 2 weeks. The rumors started on a Tuesday. Jordan first heard about them from Denise, who heard about them from a friend who worked at a different restaurant across town, who had seen something posted in a private industry group on social media, the kind of group that existed for restaurant workers to share information, commiserate, and occasionally warn each other about difficult regulars. Someone had posted about a waiter at an upscale Chicago restaurant who had been rude and aggressive toward a prominent guest. The post was vague enough to avoid direct identification, but specific enough that anyone who knew the Bellevue Crown's staffing would make the connection in under 30 seconds. The word "threatening" appeared twice. The phrase "made the guest uncomfortable with intimidating behavior" appeared once. Denise showed Jordan the screenshot on her phone between the lunch and dinner shifts. He read it once, then he handed the phone back. "You okay?" Denise asked. "I'm fine," Jordan said. "Jordan." "I said I'm fine, Denise." He looked at her. "Eat your lunch." She watched him for a moment longer, with the expression of someone who wanted to push and knew they shouldn't. "I went to the back of the kitchen, stood near the dry storage, and took the minute he needed. Just the minute. 60 seconds of letting the reality of the thing settle without immediately needing to perform a reaction to it. Someone, and he knew exactly who, because this was not a complicated calculation, had decided that the best defense was offense. That the best way to manage the story was to get a different story into the world first. A version where Jordan was the aggressor. A version where Victor Whitmore was a wealthy guest who had simply been subjected to inexplicable hostility from a volatile employee. Jordan thought about Amara. He thought about her coming home from school 2 days ago with a strange quietness. He'd asked her about her day and she'd said it was fine. He'd asked again because he had always been able to tell when fine was a word she was using to cover something, and she'd said that a kid at school had said something about her dad being on the internet. "What did they say?" Jordan had asked. "That you lost your temper at a restaurant and yelled at a customer." He had kept his face very still. "Is that what they said?" "I told them it wasn't true." She looked at him with those eyes. "It isn't true, right?" "I said 5 words to someone who was being unkind," Jordan said, calmly, "and then I went back to work." "That's what I told them," she said. "I said my dad doesn't yell." And then after a moment, "But there's something on the internet, Dad. I saw it. People are saying stuff." He had pulled her into a hug and held her for a moment and said, People say things. That doesn't make them true. You know me. That's the only thing that matters." She had nodded against his shoulder, but he had felt her hold on just a second longer than usual. And that second, that small extra second of a 9-year-old girl gripping her father a little tighter because the world had said something unkind about him, that second lived in Jordan's chest like an ember. "I didn't let it become a flame." He went back out to the floor and did his job. Claire called him on Thursday. She'd called twice since the first conversation, brief and purposeful calls checking in, though she didn't phrase it that way because she was perceptive enough to know that Jordan was not a man who responded well to being checked on. She phrased it as updates. "I want you to know what I'm seeing," she said, "because I think you have a right to current information." "Tell me," Jordan said. "Victor knows about your company," she said. "He knows about Ellis Integrated Systems, and he knows about the acquisition chain. Someone in his operation did the research probably in the last few days. He hasn't said anything to me directly. He doesn't know that I know, but I can tell by the way he's moving." "How is he moving?" "Carefully," she said, "which is what he does when something threatens him. He becomes very controlled and very quiet and very deliberate, the opposite of how he was in the restaurant." A pause. "He's also spoken to his legal team, separately from his main counsel, the sensitive matters firm." Jordan processed that. "He's building a defense. He's preparing for something. I don't know exactly what." Her voice was measured. "But the rumors online, the posts about an aggressive employee, I know about those." "I'm sorry," she said. "That's him. I can't prove it, but I know it's him." "I know it too." "Jordan." A shift in her voice, something more direct. "He's going to try to make sure that if this story comes out, it comes out his way. He's going to try to get ahead of it." "I know that too," Jordan said. "What are you going to do?" I thought about that question. He'd been thinking about it since Tuesday, in the spaces between tables in the quiet of the apartment, after Amara fell asleep on the walk to school and back. "Nothing right now," he said. A pause. "That's your choice," Claire said carefully. "It is," Jordan agreed. "But there's a difference between doing nothing and waiting. I'm not doing nothing. I'm waiting." "For what?" "For the right moment," he said. "There's always a right moment. You just have to be patient enough not to move before it arrives." Silence on the line. "He's planning a major presentation," Claire said then, and something in her voice shifted in a way Jordan noticed. A decision being made in real time. "In 3 weeks. It's a public event investors partners media. He's announcing the next phase of the Whitmore logistics expansion, new technology integration. He's been positioning it as a major leap forward." Jordan said nothing. "The technology he's presenting as a new development," Claire said. "The framework, the optimization architecture. Jordan, I've looked at the specifications they're going to present. It's a refinement of what you built, not a new development, a refinement. And they're going to present it as proprietary Whitmore innovation with no attribution." The ember in Jordan's chest did something. Not a flame, not yet, but it moved. "Send me what you have," he said, "if you're willing. Whatever documentation you found, whatever specs, whatever you pulled from the acquisition records, send it to me." A pause. "That's not nothing," Claire said quietly. "No," Jordan agreed. "It's not nothing, but it's still waiting. It's preparation. Those are different things." She was quiet for a moment. "I'll send it tonight," she said. "Thank you, Claire." And he noticed in the small silence after he used her first name that something had shifted between them, not dramatically, but perceptibly. "Be careful," she said. "I'm always careful," he said. "That's one of the things your husband misread. He thought careful meant weak. It doesn't." She said, "I know." The documents arrived that night at 11 after Amara was asleep. Jordan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and read through everything Claire had sent. He read slowly and completely the way he had always read important things, not scanning for what he expected to find, but actually absorbing what was there, because the difference between what you expected and what was actually on the page was often where the truth lived. There were the acquisition records, the Meridian Bridge capital transaction documents showing the purchase of Ellis Integrated Systems at a price that made his jaw tighten in a way he controlled immediately. There were the corporate development summaries that showed the integration of his technology into the Whitmore Logistics operational infrastructure summaries, written in the dry transactional language of people who understood exactly what they were absorbing and had simply chosen not to think too hard about how they'd obtained it. And there were the presentation specifications for the upcoming event, 47 slides, a sleek, heavily designed document with the Whitmore Logistics branding throughout the dark navy and silver that appeared on trucks and warehouses and corporate communications across the Midwest. The new initiative was branded something called Logic Flow Next. The copy described it as a revolutionary proprietary framework developed by Whitmore Logistics' internal engineering team over the last 3 years. Jordan read the technical specifications on slides 18 through 24. He read them twice. He closed his eyes. The architecture described on those slides was not something developed by anyone's internal engineering team over the last 3 years. He knew what those slides described, the way he knew the rhythm of his own handwriting, the way he knew Amara's breathing and sleep, at the level of recognition that bypassed thought entirely and arrived as simple certainty. It was his, not built on his work, not inspired by his work, not a natural development that happened to parallel his work. It was his work refined and dressed in different clothing, presented in different language, but underneath in the structural logic, in the decision architecture, in the specific approach to real-time variable weighting, unmistakably, undeniably his. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I thought about 2015, about the hospital, about the particular quality of 3 a.m. in a children's hospital, the specific light, the specific sound of machines, about sitting in a plastic chair outside Amara's room and calling the one buyer who had expressed interest in Ellis Integrated Systems and saying quietly and without drama that he was ready to sell and needed to move quickly. About the buyer's pause, a pause that Jordan had understood even then as the pause of someone computing the distance between what they should offer and what they needed to offer to close the thing immediately. About accepting the number that came after the pause, about Amara's face 3 weeks later when she was well enough to come home. He had never regretted the choice. He did not regret it now. But sitting at that kitchen table reading those 47 slides, Jordan Ellis felt something he had been carefully managing for 3 years settle into a different form. It had been anger controlled. It had been patience chosen. It had been the daily discipline of a man who had made peace with what he'd sacrificed. What it became reading those slides was purpose. Not the reactive, burning kind of purpose that made men do reckless things in service of wounded pride. The other kind. The quiet, structural kind. The kind that felt like putting your hands on a blueprint you'd drawn years ago and finding it exactly as you'd left it. He pulled out a legal pad. He began to write. He wrote for 2 hours. Not a plan, not yet. A document. A careful, thorough, factual account of what he had built when he had built it, what the original specifications had contained, and how those specifications compared to what was in the Whitmore Logistics presentation documents. He wrote from memory, and his memory was excellent, and every technical claim he made on the legal pad was something he could support, because he had kept in a box in the back of his closet in a folder he hadn't opened in 3 years, the original development files. The drafts, the whiteboard photographs, the time-stamped build logs, the correspondence, everything a man keeps when he builds something real filed away, not for any strategic purpose, but simply because you don't throw away things you made. He had learned that from his father, who had never thrown away anything he'd built with his own hands. He filled 12 pages of the legal pad. At 1:45 in the morning he stopped, read what he'd written from the beginning, made 3 corrections, and then folded the pages and put them beside the laptop. He would need someone who understood intellectual property law. Not just any lawyer, someone specific. Someone who understood both technology and corporate acquisition law, who had seen cases where foundational IP had been absorbed into a much larger company without appropriate attribution or compensation, and who had the kind of disposition that didn't flinch at the size of the opponent. He knew someone. He had known her since before, from the early days of Ellis Integrated Systems, when he'd paid for legal consultation in quarterly installments because cash had been tight and she'd taken it in good faith because she believed in what he was building. Her name was Dr. Patricia Okafor, and she had gone on from general IP work to become one of the most respected technology attorneys in Chicago, which Jordan had followed from a distance, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed good people generally ended up where they deserved. He had not called her in 4 years. He picked up his phone. He put it back down. It was almost 2 in the morning. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about the presentation. 3 weeks away. A public event. Investors, partners, media. Victor Whitmore standing at a podium presenting a revolutionary proprietary framework to an audience that would have no reason to question the claim. And Jordan Ellis in 3 weeks would be carrying plates somewhere in the city, unless. The word sat in his mind, quiet and enormous. Unless. He thought about what Claire had said. He's going to try to make sure that if this story comes out, it comes out his way. Jordan looked at the ceiling. Not this time, he said, quietly, to the dark, to no one. He slept. He called Patricia Okafor at 9:15 the next morning. She picked up on the third ring. "Jordan Ellis," she said, and her voice had the particular warmth of someone for whom surprise and pleasure have arrived simultaneously. "I was wondering when you'd call." He stopped. "You were expecting me to call." "I saw your name connected to something online this week," she said. "The restaurant thing." "Ah. I also know about the Whitmore acquisition of Meridian Bridge Capital," she said. "I have for about 2 years. I looked into it when I was working on a related IP case and recognized the architecture. I didn't reach out because I didn't know what your situation was." Jordan sat down. "You recognized it." "Jordan," she said with a gentle patience that reminded him of why he had trusted her. "I spent 18 months helping you build the legal framework for that company. I know what your code looks like. I know how your architectural decisions present in documentation. When I saw what Whitmore Logistics filed in their operational patents in 2019, I recognized the fingerprints." A pause. "I thought about calling you then." "Why didn't you?" "Because the call I'd have been making was, 'Jordan, do you want to fight a multi-billion-dollar corporation in federal court?' And I didn't know if it was what you needed." He thought about that. And now, she said, and her voice shifted into the register he remembered from their working sessions, precise, energized, certain. "You've apparently made a man publicly embarrass himself in a restaurant, which means the story is already out of the box and he's apparently trying to rebury it, which means we have a window, a narrow one, but a window." She paused. "The presentation in 3 weeks. You know about the presentation." "I know about everything, Jordan. It's my job." A beat. "Do you have documentation, original files, timestamped development records?" "Yes, all of it, all of it." A pause in which he could hear the quality of her thinking, a particular kind of quiet that always preceded her most decisive statements. "Then we need to meet," she said. "Today if you can, bring everything." "I can meet this afternoon," he said. "After 2:30, she said. "My office." "Jordan." "Yeah, I'm glad you called." "So am I," he said. He meant it. Patricia Okafor's office was on the 14th floor of a building on South Wacker, and when Jordan walked in at 2:28 with a bag containing his laptop, his legal pad, and a folder of documents he had retrieved from the box in his closet that morning, she was standing at her desk, already waiting. She was a small woman, 52, with close-cropped hair and the specific kind of stillness that, in his experience, marked people who had learned to conserve energy for what actually required it. She looked at him. Not the way people sometimes looked at him, cataloging the uniform, the shoes, the specific way that time and circumstance had marked him, but the way she had always looked at him, like what she was measuring was something interior. "You look good," she said. "You look exactly the same," he said. "Flattery from clients is a conflict of interest." He sat down. "Walk me through the timeline," she said, sitting across from him, legal pad already open. "From the beginning. I know most of it, but I want it from you. Every detail," he told her. He talked for 45 minutes without stopping, which was the longest he had talked about this period of his life since it had ended. He told her about the build, the 2.5 years of development, the conference in 2014, the conversations with potential investors that had never quite closed before everything changed. He told her about the diagnosis. He told her about the call to the buyer. He told her the number, the actual number, which he had never said aloud to anyone since the day it was agreed. And he watched Patricia's face hold completely still in the way of someone absorbing something they already knew and finding it no less arresting for the knowing. He told her about the years after, the transitional work, the restaurant, the deliberate choice to not look backward. He told her about the restaurant on Friday night. He told her everything Claire had sent. And then he put the folder on the desk and opened it. Patricia looked at the documents for a long time. She asked questions, specific technical detailed questions about aspects of the original architecture, about the 2015, about what Jordan had and hadn't known at the time of the sale. She took notes with the focused efficiency of someone building something. At 4:45, she put down her pen. "Here's where we are," she said. "The acquisition was legal. You signed the transfer documents. The buyer purchased the IP and had the right to integrate it into any operational system they subsequently acquired or built. That part is clean and it will remain clean. I'm not going to waste your time telling you otherwise." "But," Jordan said, "but the filing of operational patents in 2019 and the presentation of that architecture as proprietary Whitmore innovation, in those two things there is a question." She chose her words carefully. The original transaction did not include a clause transferring attribution rights. That wasn't standard practice at the time for a transaction of this type and size. What it means is that the technology was purchased, yes, but the intellectual record, the public record of who built the original framework, was never formally transferred. It was simply buried. And in the patent filings and in this presentation, it has been actively, specifically, and provably presented as something other than what it is. She looked at him. "That's not just a moral problem," she said. "That's a legal one. And in the context of a public investor presentation where the provenance of core technology is being material misrepresented." "Securities issue," Jordan said quietly. "Potentially, yes." She held his gaze. "Jordan, this is real. This is not a small thing. Are you ready for what happens when you pull this thread?" He thought about Amara, about the extra second of her hug, about the kid at school who had read something online, about Victor Whitmore at a podium in 3 weeks presenting Jordan's work as his own innovation. About 12%. "Yes," he said. "It's going to be a fight," Patricia said. "He has resources that—" "I know what he has," Jordan said. "I know exactly what he has because I know where part of it came from." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "Okay then," she said. "Here's what we're going to do." She talked for 20 minutes. She laid out a plan with the kind of architectural precision that Jordan recognized that builder's logic, the understanding that the right foundation determines everything that rises above it. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions at the end, both of which she had anticipated and had already built into the plan's structure. When she finished, he sat back. "This doesn't touch the restaurant," he said. "I don't want Marcus or Denise or anyone at Bellevue Crown pulled into this." "Agreed. The restaurant is separate. And I need it documented before the presentation. Whatever we're going to establish publicly, I need it on record before he walks out to that podium, not as a reaction to his event, before it." She nodded. "That's the correct instinct. We file within the week. I'll need 2 days to prepare the documentation package, and I'll need you available to review and confirm every technical claim before we submit." "I can do that." "This will become public," she said. "Not immediately. But when we file and when the presentation happens and when those 2 things are in the same room—" "I know," Jordan said. "Are you sure, Amara?" "She's going to be fine," Jordan said. And then, because he was honest when it mattered, "She's going to be scared at first, but she's her father's daughter. She'll be fine." Patricia studied him. "You know what the hardest part of this is going to be," she said. "Tell me." "Not the filing, not the legal challenge, not even the media attention if it comes to that." She paused. "The hardest part is going to be the 3 weeks between now and that presentation, knowing what you know, watching him move forward as if nothing is different, staying in your lane, being patient." Jordan looked at her. "Patricia," he said quietly, "I've been patient for 3 years." She held his gaze. Something moved in her expression, not quite admiration, but the specific kind of recognition one person feels when another person's depth becomes suddenly visible. "Then 3 more weeks," she said, "should be nothing." He gathered his documents. He put them carefully back in the folder, the way he handled everything that mattered with the attention of someone who understood that the way you care for a thing tells the thing's story before you ever have to speak it aloud. He stood. "Thank you, Patricia." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Save it for when it's over." He walked out into the afternoon, into the specific light and noise of a Chicago Thursday, and he took the train home, and he picked Amara up from school because he'd arranged his shift to start later tonight, and she ran to him at the gate with her green jacket open and her backpack half falling off one shoulder and her face carrying whatever the day had given her, and he caught her in one arm and straightened her backpack with the other and said, "How was Gerald today?" She looked at him with those eyes. "Dad," she said, "Gerald is fictional." "I know. How was he?" She sighed, the enormous sigh of a child surrounded by unreasonable adults. "He cracked a case, obviously." "Obviously," Jordan agreed. They walked home. The city moved around them, enormous and indifferent and full of its own stories, and Jordan Ellis walked through it with his daughter at his side, and the knowledge sitting in his chest, not heavy, not yet, but present, that the 3 weeks ahead would require everything he had learned about the difference between patience and surrender. He had made that distinction clearly a long time ago. He knew exactly which one this was. The 3 weeks moved, the way time moves when you are carrying something heavy, not slowly exactly, but with a density that made each day feel more substantial than usual, like the air had weight in it. Jordan kept his schedule. He showed up to every shift. He served every table with the same precision, the same attention, the same quiet professionalism that Marcus had built his trust on. He refilled glasses. He remembered preferences. He carried plates with the steadiness of a man who had decided that the ground beneath him was exactly as solid as he chose to make it. Nobody looking at him during those 3 weeks would have seen anything different. That was intentional. In the margins of those 3 weeks, in the early mornings before Amara woke up, in the hour between getting home and going to sleep on the days he wasn't scheduled at the restaurant, he worked with Patricia. He reviewed documents. He confirmed technical claims, walking her through architectural decisions he had made 11 years ago, with the detailed memory of someone who had built every piece of a thing himself and therefore understood not just what it did, but why each component was shaped the way it was. He answered questions from a junior attorney on Patricia's team who asked smart questions and took careful notes. He reviewed the filing draft 3 times, correcting 2 technical characterizations and 1 date, because precision was not optional when the document was going to be placed in front of people who would look for any crack in the foundation. Patricia filed on a Wednesday morning, 9 days before the presentation. She called Jordan at 9:45 to confirm. "It's in," she said. He was in the kitchen making coffee. "Okay," he said. "That's all you've got. Okay. What would you like me to say?" "I don't know. Something more than okay." "It's the right thing," Jordan said. "I've been sure of that for 3 weeks. The filing doesn't change the feeling, it just makes it real." A pause. "Jordan." "Yeah. If Whitmore's legal team is monitoring relevant filings, and they are, I would be doing exactly the same in their position. They may know within 48 hours. "I know. That gives him 9 days to respond before the presentation." "I know that too. He's going to move fast." "So are we," Jordan said. "If he moves." "What does that mean?" "It means if he calls," Jordan said carefully, "or if his people call, or if anything comes in that direction, you have permission to make it clear that I'm open to a conversation. A real one. Not a negotiation about how to keep this quiet. A conversation about what fair looks like." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You want to give him a chance?" "I want to see what kind of man he is when the exit is closing," Jordan said. "That's different from giving him a chance. Most people would just let the filing speak for itself. Most people haven't spent 3 years carrying plates while the thing they built made somebody else a billionaire," Jordan said. "I'm not most people. I want to look him in the eye before this is over." Another pause. Longer this time. "All right," Patricia said. "I'll communicate that we're open to preliminary discussion. But Jordan, if he comes at this with lawyers and delay tactics and the standard playbook for burying things, then we stop being open," Jordan said, "and we walk into that presentation." The line was quiet. "Yes," Patricia said. "Then we walk into the presentation." Victor Whitmore found out on a Friday. His legal team, not the main counsel, the sensitive matters firm, called at 11 in the morning to inform him that a filing had been submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies connecting Ellis Integrated Systems' original intellectual property to the technology described in the upcoming Logic Flow Next presentation. The filing was comprehensive. It included original development documentation, time-stamped build records, technical specifications, and a detailed comparative analysis between the original Ellis architecture and the current Whitmore Logistics operational patents. Victor listened without speaking. When the attorney finished, he asked 2 questions. How solid is it? A pause. The technical correlation, is it strong? Very strong. What does strong mean? It means if this goes in front of someone who understands the technology, the attorney said carefully. It's going to be difficult to argue that the architecture described in your presentation has no relationship to Ellis Integrated Systems. Victor stood at the window of his home office, the Chicago skyline, distant and bright against a cold November morning. And if the presentation proceeds as planned, then the filing becomes a public record that contradicts the provenance claims in the presentation in front of an investor and media audience. Another pause. We'd want to avoid that. What are my options? The attorney laid them out. Delay the presentation optics were difficult. Challenge the filing directly possible, but the timeline before the presentation made a successful challenge nearly impossible. Reach out to Ellis through counsel for a private resolution, highest likelihood of containing the situation before it became public. He's open to conversation, the attorney added. His attorney communicated that. Victor said nothing. Mr. Whitmore, I heard you. He turned from the window. Set up the call, with his attorney, not with him directly, and make it clear that we're having a preliminary conversation about options, not a negotiation, not an admission of anything. Understood. When would you, today, Victor said. This afternoon. He hung up. He sat at his desk. For the first time in a very long time, Victor Whitmore sat at a desk he had built his identity around and felt the specific, unfamiliar sensation of a room that had been constructed to make him feel powerful, failing to do exactly that. He thought about the restaurant, about the waiter he had mocked, about the shoes. He did not experience guilt the way other people did. He knew that about himself, had always known it in the way that people know things about their own operating system that they find inconvenient but true. But he experienced something adjacent to it, a kind of friction, the machinery of his self-image encountering something that wouldn't process smoothly. He thought about Claire. She had been careful with him in the weeks since the restaurant. Not distant, nothing as obvious as that, but careful, watching. He had felt the quality of her attention shift, and he had not asked about it because asking about it would require acknowledging that he had noticed it, and acknowledging that he had noticed it would open a conversation he wasn't ready to have. He pulled out his phone. He thought about calling her. He put it back down. He called Garrett instead. Tell me everything you know about Jordan Ellis's lawyer, he said. The call between the attorneys happened at 3 p.m. Patricia on one side, the sensitive matters firm on the other. Jordan was not on the call. He had asked Patricia to represent him entirely, partly because the preliminary conversation was a legal matter, and he trusted her completely, and partly because he understood that his own presence would change the emotional temperature of the exchange in ways that might not serve the outcome he actually wanted. Patricia called him at 4:15. They want to meet, she said, in person, Victor personally, not his lawyers, well, with his lawyers present, but he wants to be in the room. Jordan thought about that. When? They proposed tomorrow, Saturday morning, his hotel. Not his hotel, Jordan said immediately. I said the same thing. Neutral location. They agreed. There's a conference facility downtown they use for sensitive matters. Okay. Jordan, he's coming to a meeting. That's for a man like Victor Whitmore, that's a significant move. He doesn't come to meetings. He hosts them. I know what it means, Jordan said. He's worried. He's very worried, Patricia said. The attorney who called me was doing an excellent job of sounding confident, but there's a specific way people talk when they're confident, and a specific way they talk when they're performing confidence, and this was the second one. Jordan nodded to himself. What's our position going in? We're going in with documentation, with the filing on record, and with the presentation 9 days out. That's our leverage, and it's considerable. A pause. What do you want to walk out with? He had thought about this. For 3 weeks, in the margins of his shifts and the quiet of his apartment, he had thought about this specific question. 3 things, he said. Attribution. A settlement that reflects what the technology was actually worth, not what I sold it for under duress. And the rumors, whatever was posted online about the aggressive waiter, I want it publicly corrected, not quietly deleted, corrected. The third one is the easiest, Patricia said. The second will be a fight they'll anchor low and will need to hold the line. The first, she paused. The first is the one that might get complicated. Why? Because attribution is permanent. It changes the record. It changes how the company's history is told. And men like Victor Whitmore. I know, Jordan said. It's still non-negotiable. A pause. Okay, I'll structure the conversation accordingly. One more thing, Jordan said. Yeah, I want to be in the room. Silence. Jordan, I want to be in the room, Patricia. Not to perform anything, not to be dramatic. I want to be there because this is about me and what I built and what happened to it. And I don't want to read a summary of the conversation. I want to hear what he says when there's nowhere left to hide. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. If you're in the room, she said carefully, you cannot react emotionally. You cannot let him provoke you, and he will try because that's what he does when he's off balance. He goes on offense. I know how to not react, Jordan said. I know you do, she said. That's the only reason I'm not fighting you harder on this. A pause. Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. Dress comfortably. Don't dress up. Why not? Because you showing up in your best suit signals that this meeting matters to you more than it matters to him. You show up looking like you do on a Tuesday, it signals that you have other things to do today. This is just one of them. Jordan almost smiled. You're good at this. Yes, she said. I am. 8 o'clock. He didn't sleep well on Friday night, not because he was afraid. He had been honest with himself about fear long enough to recognize when it wasn't fear and when it was something else. What he felt Friday night was the specific alertness of a man who has spent a long time preparing for something and is now close enough to feel the air change, like a weather shift. Not bad, not good, just different. He lay awake and he thought about his father. His father had been a maintenance worker, 41 years in the same building in the same city doing the kind of work that kept things running without ever being the kind of work that made anyone rich or famous. He had been steady in the specific way of people who don't need external validation to know their own value. He used to say Jordan heard it 100 times growing up, and every time he'd thought he understood it, and later realized he'd understood it a layer shallower than it actually went. He used to say, the thing about doing honest work is that it belongs to you. Nobody can take it away, and nobody can give it to you. It's the one thing in the world that's actually yours. Jordan had built a company. He had sold it. But the work, the actual intellectual labor, the years of thinking and building and refining and testing the ideas that had come at 3 a.m. and been written on whatever surface was closest the specific architecture of a mind working at the absolute edge of its capability that had never stopped being his. That was what Saturday was about. Not the money, though. The money mattered, and he was not going to pretend it didn't. Not the recognition for its own sake, but the simple foundational fact that the work belonged to him. It had always belonged to him, and the record, the historical record, the story of where this technology came from and why was going to reflect that. He got up at 6. Amara's breakfast before she woke up. He wrote her a note. She loved notes, had a box where she kept the ones he wrote her, which he found both touching and slightly terrifying, given that he'd written some of them half asleep and left it on the table where she'd find it. I'll be back by noon. Mrs. Calloway has a key. Gerald would handle this with logic. Love, Dad. He got dressed. He drove to the conference facility. He arrived at 7:52. Patricia was already in the hallway outside the meeting room. She looked at what he was wearing, dark jeans, a clean button down his good coat, and nodded once. Perfect, she said. How do you want to play the opening? He asked. Let them open. They'll have a prepared statement, they always do. It's a stalling tactic and a framing tactic simultaneously. Let them finish. Don't respond to it. Look at Whitmore, not at his lawyers. When they're done, I speak first and then you speak. Short and direct. No more than 4 sentences. What do I say? You'll know when the moment comes, she said. You've been living with this for 3 years. The right words will be there. He looked at her. You say that like I have a speech prepared. You don't need a speech, she said. You need to say one true thing, one clear true thing. That's usually enough. The door to the conference room opened. One of Whitmore's attorneys, a tall man in his 50s, with the careful face of someone whose profession required him to never fully reveal what he was thinking, leaned out. We're ready, he said. Patricia nodded. She went in first. Jordan followed. Victor Whitmore was sitting at the far side of the conference table. Not at the head, the table was rectangular, and both parties were positioned along the sides, which was itself a negotiated arrangement Jordan understood. Nobody at the head meant nobody was hosting. It was a room of equals, at least formally. Victor looked different than he had in the restaurant. That was Jordan's first thought walking in. Not smaller. Victor was still a physically imposing man, still carried himself with the ingrained authority of someone accustomed to rooms conforming to his presence. But something in the composition was different. In the restaurant, he had been expansive, his body occupying more space than it needed, his voice calibrated for an audience. Here he was contained, precise. The jacket was perfect, the posture was controlled, but the sprawl was gone. How was managing himself? That told Jordan everything he needed to know about how worried Victor actually was. 2 attorneys on their side, Patricia and her junior associate on Jordan's side. 6 people in a room where the air had the specific quality of rooms where significant things are decided. Victor looked at Jordan when he walked in. Jordan met his eyes. Neither of them said anything in that first moment. But something passed between them, a mutual recognition, complex and specific. The look of 2 people who have been circling the same fixed point from opposite directions and have finally arrived at it simultaneously. Jordan sat down. The tall attorney opened. As predicted, a prepared statement, careful measured language about the nature of IP acquisition, about the legal validity of the 2015 transaction, about Whitmore Logistics' long history of above-board business practices. It lasted 4 minutes. Jordan listened without expression. When the attorney finished, Patricia spoke. She laid out the filing, the documentation, the technical correlation, the specific legal questions raised by the presentation's provenance claims. She spoke for 6 minutes. She was precise and comprehensive and entirely unemotional, which was exactly right, because this was the stage of the conversation where emotion was a liability. Then she looked at Jordan, and Jordan looked at Victor. "I built that technology," Jordan said. "You know that, I know that. The documentation in the filing proves it, but honestly, the documentation is secondary to the fact that we both already know it's true." He paused. "I'm not here to burn your company down. I'm not here to be angry about 2015. I made a choice in 2015, and I'd make it again. I'm here because in 3 weeks you're standing on a stage telling investors and journalists and business partners that what I built is something you built, and I'm not going to let that happen." Victor had not moved. His expression was controlled, but something behind his eyes was doing a kind of calculation Jordan could see the edges of. "What do you want?" Victor asked. His voice was different. Not the restaurant voice, not that performance register. Something flatter, something that was closer to the actual man. "Attribution," Jordan said. "On the record, in the presentation, in the company's documented history. And fair compensation, not charity, not generosity, not a number designed to make this go away quietly. Fair. What the technology was actually worth in 2015 minus what I received, with appropriate interest." Victor's jaw tightened. "And the rumors," Jordan said. "The posts about an aggressive employee. You know where those came from. They get corrected publicly. That's non-negotiable." Silence. Victor looked at his attorneys. Something passed between them. Not words, but the kind of communication that happens between people who have worked together long enough to have a shorthand. Then Victor looked back at Jordan. "You're asking me to stand up at my own event and tell a room full of investors that the foundational technology was built by someone He stopped. "By someone you mocked," Jordan said quietly. "Yes." The word landed. Victor said nothing. "Victor!" Claire's voice. Jordan's head turned. For the first time, he saw that she was in the room at the far end near the door, seated slightly apart from the group in a way that made her presence ambiguous observer rather than participant. He hadn't seen her when he walked in. She was looking at her husband. "She's not a party to," one of Victor's attorneys began. "She's my wife," Victor said, not loudly, but with a finality that closed the sentence immediately. Claire held Victor's gaze. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Whatever she communicated in those few seconds was something that only 23 years of marriage could encode. Victor put his hand flat on the table. He looked at Jordan. "I need the room," he said. 15 minutes. Patricia looked at Jordan. Jordan nodded. They stepped out. In the hallway. Patricia said nothing for a moment. Then, "He's going to say yes." "Maybe," Jordan said. Not maybe. The way he looked at her. I saw it. That was a man who's been told something he can't unknow, Patricia said. And now he's sitting in a room with the consequences of it. She paused. What did you feel being in there with him? Jordan thought about the question honestly. Less than I expected, he said. And more. What does that mean? The anger was less than I expected. I thought being in that room with him would bring it back, the restaurant, the shoes, all of it. It didn't. It felt distant. He looked at the hallway wall. But the other thing was more. The part that's about the work. The part that's about what gets erased when a person's contribution disappears from the record. That was more present than I expected. Because it's not really about him, Patricia said. No, Jordan said. It's not about him at all. He's just the person who happened to be standing at the end of the chain. The man who mocked your shoes while wearing the shoes you bought him, Patricia said. Jordan looked at her. That's not what I said. I know, she said. I'm summarizing. I was quiet for a moment. He has a chance to do the right thing right now, Jordan said. I want him to take it, not for my sake, for the sake of what it says about whether the truth can survive in a system like his. Patricia looked at him. That's an enormous amount of grace for a man who... I know what he did, Jordan said. I was there. The door opened. The tall attorney leaned out. Mr. Whitmore is ready. Victor was standing when they came back in. Not at the table, he'd moved to the window. When Jordan came in, he turned. He looked at Jordan for a long moment. Then he said, the presentation will include full attribution. Your name, your company, the original development timeline. It won't be a footnote. It'll be in the opening section, and it'll be specific. He paused. The settlement number, my attorneys will have a proposal to your attorney by end of business Monday. I want it fair. I'm saying that as a directive to them now in front of you. He glanced at his attorneys briefly, then back. And the posts come down, and a correction goes up from a source that has credibility in the industry. Today. Silence. Jordan looked at him. Why? Jordan asked. Victor's expression shifted. Why what? Why are you agreeing? You have resources. You have lawyers. You could delay this past the presentation and manage the fallout and probably survive it. So why are you agreeing right now? A long pause. Victor looked at Claire, then he looked back at Jordan. Because my wife told me something last week, he said. She told me that the measure of a man wasn't what he did when he was winning. It was what he did when the door was closing. He stopped. And because I spent an evening trying to make you feel like nothing. And you stood there and looked at me and said 5 words. And the room felt it. All of them felt it. And I felt it too. I just didn't admit it until now. Jordan held his gaze. I built your foundation, Jordan said quietly. Not metaphorically, technically. The thing you stand on when you stand on that stage. I built it. I know, Victor said. I want the record to say that. It will. Another silence. Jordan stood. He extended his hand. Victor looked at it for a fraction of a second, long enough for the moment to be real, not performative. Then he took it. They shook once. The handshake of 2 people who would never be friends, who would perhaps never entirely understand each other, but who had arrived in this room at something that was at minimum honest. Jordan picked up his folder. He looked at Claire on the way out. She held his gaze. He nodded once. She nodded back. He and Patricia walked out of the conference facility and into the cold November Saturday morning. Patricia said, "You okay?" "Yes," Jordan said. "That went, I know." "Jordan." She stopped walking. He stopped too. "What you just did in there, the way you held that room, most people don't know how to do that. Most people with that much justified anger and that much legitimate grievance, they either explode or they fold. You didn't do either. You just held your own ground without taking anyone else's. That's rare." Jordan looked at her. He thought about his father, about the maintenance worker who had spent 41 years keeping things running and who had never needed a room to confirm his value. "My dad taught me something," he said. He said the one thing nobody can take from you is the work you actually did. You just have to make sure the record eventually catches up to the truth. Patricia was quiet. "Let's get breakfast," Jordan said. She laughed, an actual laugh, sudden and real. "Yeah," she said, "let's get breakfast." I was home by 11:45. Amara was at the kitchen table with her mystery book and what appeared to be the remains of a fairly significant bowl of cereal. She looked up when he came in. "You're back early," she said. "I said noon. It's before noon." She looked at him with the careful assessment of a 9-year-old who had learned to read her father's face. "Did it go okay?" He sat down across from her. He had not told her the details of what was happening. She was 9, and some weight wasn't meant for 9-year-olds. But he had told her that he was dealing with something important, that it involved work he'd done a long time ago, that it might mean some changes, but that the changes were going to be good ones. She had accepted this with the pragmatic faith of a child who trusts her parent, not because she's been given no reason to doubt, but because the consistent evidence of years has built something real. "It went okay," he said. "Better than okay." "Did you tell the truth?" "Yes." "And the other person?" Jordan thought about Victor at the window, about the handshake, about whatever Claire had said to him in the 15 minutes they'd had the room. "He did too," Jordan said. "Eventually." Amara nodded like this confirmed something. "Gerald says the truth always comes out," she said, "because the evidence never disappears. It just waits." Jordan looked at his daughter. He thought about 12 pages of a legal pad, about a box of files in a closet that he'd never thrown away, because you don't throw away things you built with your own hands. About a butter knife placed on a restaurant table with a sound so quiet it silenced an entire room. "Gerald's right," he said. She went back to her book. He got up and made 2 cups of hot chocolate, the good kind with actual milk, and he set one in front of her without saying anything, and she reached for it without looking up. And that was enough. That was, in fact, everything. 9 days later, Victor Whitmore stood at a podium in front of 400 investors, journalists, and business partners, and he opened the Logic Flow next presentation with a section that had not been in any previous draft. He said the name Jordan Ellis. He said it clearly. He said it twice. He described Ellis Integrated Systems and the framework that had been built between 2012 and 2015. He described the acquisition. He said that the operational architecture underlying Whitmore Logistics Technology Suite had been built by a man whose contribution had not been appropriately acknowledged, and that this was being corrected now on this stage in this room because some things deserved to be said publicly. The room was very quiet, not the quiet of discomfort, the quiet of surprise. And then in the back of the room someone started to clap, then another person, then the room. Jordan was not there. He was at the Bellevue Crown working a Friday dinner shift, moving between tables with the quiet efficiency of a man who had made peace with every version of himself that had ever existed. Marcus told him about it the next morning, called him on a Saturday, which Marcus never did. "It was something," Marcus said. "I watched the live stream. He actually said your name." "I heard," Jordan said. "How did you hear you weren't there?" "Patricia texted me a clip." And Jordan sat at his kitchen table. Through the window, the city was doing what cities do on Saturday mornings, running slower, breathing differently, the specific looseness of a day without urgency. And, Jordan said, "It was the right thing. It happened. That's enough." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're a strange man, Jordan Ellis." "I know. I mean that as a compliment." "I know that too. The raise hits your check this week, by the way. Stephen signed off on it." Jordan looked at the table. "Tell Stephen thank you. Tell him yourself. He wants to have lunch." "I can do that." He hung up. Amara appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas hair, outstanding, carrying Gerald the mystery book, like a totem. "Was that work?" she said. "Marcus," Jordan said. "Good news." She sat down. She looked at him with those eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. He looked at her. This small, fierce, brilliant person who had cost him everything and was worth every single piece of it. "Amara," he said, "we have always been okay." She considered this. "Even the bad times." "Especially the bad times," he said. "That's when you find out what okay actually means." She seemed to process that. Then, "Can we have pancakes?" He stood up. He went to the stove. He made pancakes. And the morning was ordinary and perfect and entirely theirs, and outside the window the city moved in its enormous, indifferent way, and somewhere across town the record had been corrected, and somewhere in a conference room lawyers were finalizing numbers, and somewhere in a hotel suite Claire Whitmore was thinking about something he didn't know what, not yet, and none of it touched the kitchen, none of it touched the pancakes, none of it touched the 9-year-old reading her mystery book at the table while her father cooked. Some things were separate from the rest of the world. Some things were just yours. Jordan Ellis flipped a pancake and listened to his daughter explain why Gerald's deductive methodology was superior to every other fictional detective's, and thought about his father, and thought about work, and thought about truth, and thought, this is what I built. Not the technology, this kitchen, this morning, this girl. This was the thing nobody could acquire, nobody could patent, nobody could present as their own innovation at a public event. This was the one thing the Record had always gotten right. The settlement took 11 days to finalize. Patricia had told him, going in that settlement's like this one, where the underlying asset was intellectual property embedded in a functioning corporate infrastructure, and where the acquiring party had both the resources and the motivation to complicate the process, could drag out for months, sometimes longer. She had prepared him for the possibility of a prolonged negotiation of offers and counteroffers, of the specific slow erosion that powerful legal teams used as a tool when they couldn't win on the merits. It took 11 days. Jordan believed that was because Victor Whitmore, having said what he said at the podium, having spoken Jordan's name in front of 400 people, and a live stream had arrived at a decision point that left him only one coherent direction. You couldn't stand at a public event and acknowledge a man's contribution, and then spend the next 4 months having your lawyers make that man's life difficult in private. The contradiction would be visible. The press would eventually find it. And Victor Whitmore, for all his flaws, and Jordan had spent enough time understanding the man to hold them clearly, was not stupid. He understood that the narrative had shifted. And when the narrative shifted, you adapted, or you got swallowed by the gap between what you said and what you did. He adapted. The number in the settlement was not everything. Jordan had known it wouldn't be, because no number could fully account for what the technology had become over 11 years of integration and development inside a multi-billion-dollar operation. Patricia had been honest about that ceiling from the beginning, and Jordan had accepted it because he was not naive about the way these things worked, and because the number that was on the table was, and he sat with this word carefully before applying it, fair. Not symbolic, not charity, not a calculated minimum designed to create the appearance of resolution while actually protecting the maximum possible value. Fair. He signed the documents on a Tuesday morning at Patricia's office in a chair he had sat in once before when he was building something and needed her to help him build it right. "How do you feel?" she asked when it was done. I thought about the question the way he always thought about important questions, not quickly, not with the answer he was expected to give, but with genuine attention. Like something that was out of place got put back, he said. She nodded slowly. That's a good way to say it. Not perfect, he said. It's not a perfect outcome. The technology is still theirs. The years are still gone. My daughter still grew up in a small apartment while the thing I built made someone else wealthy enough to mock strangers about their shoes. He paused. But the record is corrected, the work is acknowledged, and the number is fair. So. He looked at the signed documents on her desk. Yeah, like something got put back. Patricia folded her hands on the desk and looked at him with the expression of someone who has accompanied another person through something significant and is now on the other side of it and is trying to find the right calibration for what the other side feels like. What are you going to do now? She asked. He had been thinking about this. In the same margins, the early mornings, the quiet hours where he had spent 3 weeks preparing for the confrontation. He had spent the 11 days of negotiation thinking about what came after it. I'm going to keep working, he said. She waited. At the restaurant, he said, at least for a while. I want to figure out the next thing correctly. Not quickly, correctly. He paused. And there's something I've been thinking about building. A small place, community-focused, not fine dining. The kind of restaurant where every person who works there knows that their work matters, where the guy washing dishes knows his name is as important as the guy on the floor. He stopped. Amara came up with the name. Patricia raised her eyebrows. What is it? She said we should call it The Table, Jordan said, because she said the whole problem with fancy restaurants is who gets to sit at the table and who has to stand next to it. And she wants a place where everybody gets to sit. Patricia was very still for a moment. Then she said, She's 9 and 9.5, Jordan said. She'll correct you if you leave off the half. She's remarkable. I know. He picked up his copy of the signed documents. She has a better instinct for what matters than most adults I've met. He stood. She stood. They shook hands, a real one, the shake of people who have been through something together and come out the other side still respecting each other, which is not guaranteed and is therefore worth marking. "Jordan," she said as he was at the door. "Yeah, for what it's worth, and I know it's not the point you've made that clear, the man who walked into this office 3 weeks ago carrying that folder." She paused. "Most people in your position would have been angrier, would have wanted more, would have made it about destruction instead of correction." She shook her head slightly. "I've done this work for 20 years. You're the only client who came to me and said the goal was to set the record right. Not to win, not to take him down, to set the record right." Jordan held her gaze. "The record is about the work," he said, "not about him. It was never about him." He walked out. Denise found out about the settlement, the same way most people at the restaurant found out about things through the particular restaurant industry ecosystem of shared information that moved faster than any formal announcement could. She came to work on a Wednesday, knowing most of it, and she waited until the pre-shift setup to bring it up when she and Jordan were working side by side at the service station, and the restaurant was still quiet. "So it's true," she said, not a question. "What did you hear?" he asked. "That you built something, that it's inside the technology of the company that guy runs, that there was a settlement." She glanced at him sideways. "And that he said your name at some big event." "Most of that is accurate," Jordan said. "Most of it. He said my name twice, not once." She stared at him. "That's what you're correcting. Precision matters." She shook her head, laughing a little the way she'd gotten comfortable laughing around him, the laugh of someone who had learned that this particular person was occasionally quietly on purpose funny. Then she got serious. "Why are you still here?" she asked. He kept setting up the station. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have money now. You have your name is out there now. People know who you are. You could do anything. Go back to tech. Start something. Do the restaurant you're apparently planning right now today." She paused. "Why are you still here carrying plates?" Jordan stopped. He looked at her. "Because carrying plates is honest work," he said. "And because I'm not going to let one man's behavior, even corrected, even resolved, make me run from something I chose. I chose this. I chose to stand on a floor and serve people and do it well. And no settlement changes whether that was a good choice. It was a good choice." He paused. "And because I'm not ready yet. The restaurant I want to build it right. And I'm still learning things here." She looked at him for a moment. "What are you still learning?" He thought about it. "Patience," he said. And then because that wasn't quite complete, and the difference between a table that makes people feel important and a table that makes people feel welcome. Those aren't the same thing, and I want to understand that difference all the way down before I build something around it. Denise was quiet. Then she said, "I want to work at that restaurant." Jordan looked at her. "You don't even know what it'll look like." "Doesn't matter," she said. "I want to work somewhere where the person training me says things like that." He went back to the setup. "Finish the station," he said. "We open in 20 minutes. But he was smiling, and she saw it. Claire called on a Thursday evening. He was walking home from a late shift, the city doing its 11 o'clock version of itself. Not quiet, never quite quiet, but different, the way a person is different when they think no one is watching. He picked up. "I wanted to call when things had settled," she said. "When the settlement was done and the noise had quieted a little. I didn't want to call in the middle of it and have it be complicated by everything that was still unresolved." "I appreciate that," he said. "How are you?" "Good," he said. And he meant it in a way he could feel was complete. Not good as a social answer, actually good. "You..." A pause. Something in the pause. "Honestly," she said. "Please. I'm in the middle of figuring some things out," she said. "About my life. About what I've allowed to be the shape of my life for a very long time." Another pause. "Victor and I are in counseling. That probably sounds strange given everything." "It doesn't sound strange," Jordan said. He's trying," she said carefully. "I don't know what that leads to. I don't know if trying is going to be enough. But he is trying, and I think that's worth acknowledging." She stopped. "I'm telling you that because I don't want you to think I'm asking you to think well of him. I'm telling you because I think you deserve the honest picture." "Thank you," Jordan said. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "That night in the restaurant," she said, "when you said those 5 words, 'Mock me again, I dare you.'" A pause. "Were you scared?" He walked for a moment considering. Not of him, he said. I was aware of what could happen, of the way that kind of confrontation can go, of what it might cost if it went wrong. He paused. But scared of him, no. He wasn't the thing worth being scared of. What was— Saying nothing, Jordan said. That was the thing worth being scared of. Letting it go and going back to the kitchen and carrying on and spending the rest of the night wondering whether I should have said something. He paused. My daughter was going to ask me what was good about the night. She always does, and I needed to have an answer. Claire was quiet for a long moment. You said that to protect your daughter, she said slowly. Not yourself. It was both, Jordan said. But yeah, mostly her. Another silence. She sounds wonderful, Claire said. She's building a detective agency, Jordan said. Conceptually, with a fictional crow. It's complicated. Claire laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and a little surprised, and Jordan thought it was probably a sound she hadn't produced enough of in recent years. Jordan, she said when the laugh had settled. Yeah, I'd like to stay in touch, if that's something you're open to. I'm not saying that with any specific intention beyond what it is. I met someone in a restaurant who turned out to be one of the most genuinely decent people I've encountered in a long time, and I'd like to not lose track of that. He walked, the city around him, the specific cold of a Chicago November night, which had a character to it, a direct, honest cold, the kind that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. I'm open to that, he said. Good, she said quietly. Good. Take care of yourself, Claire. You too. He hung up. He walked the rest of the way home with his hands in his coat pockets and his breath visible in the cold air, thinking about nothing specific, which was itself a specific luxury. The ability to walk through the world without carrying a particular weight in a particular direction. He had not had that kind of walk in a long time. He told Amara on a Saturday morning, not everything. She was 9.5 and some of the architecture of what had happened. The legal dimensions, the corporate history, the specifics of the settlement was not the right weight for a Saturday morning. But he told her the shape of it, the true shape. He told her that a long time ago, before she was very sick, he had built something he was proud of. Something real, something that helped people do things better. And when she needed him, he had sold it to make sure she was okay. And he didn't regret that for 1 second, but the thing he'd built had gone on to become part of something much bigger without his name on it. She listened. She was still in the way, she was still when something required her full attention. And now, she asked. And now his name is on it, Jordan said. My name, where it should be, in the record. She thought about that. Does that feel good? She asked. Yes, he said. It does. Do you feel like you won? He looked at his daughter. I feel like the truth won, he said. Which is better. She was quiet for a moment, the way she got quiet when she was taking something in and organizing it into the structure of her understanding. Then she looked up at him. Dad, she said, did that man, the one from the restaurant, did he know he was being mean because of something you built? No, Jordan said. He didn't know yet. But now he knows. Now he knows. She considered this for a long, careful moment. That's sadder, she said finally. For him. Don't you think that he was mean to somebody who helped him and he didn't even know it? Jordan looked at her. Yeah, he said quietly. I think that's right. She nodded with the gravity of someone who has arrived at a moral conclusion through genuine reasoning and is satisfied with the work. Okay, she said. Can we start planning the restaurant now? He blinked. The restaurant. The table, she said. I named it. I should be involved in the planning. He stared at her for a long moment. You're 9. 9.5. You're 9.5. Gerald solved his first case at 8, she said. And he's fictional, which makes it harder. Jordan put his face in his hands. Not from frustration, from the laughter he was trying to keep at a manageable level. Then he took his hands away. Get some paper, he said. She was out of her chair before he finished the sentence. The table opened 14 months later. It was not large. That was intentional. 32 seats, a kitchen that was visible from the dining room through a wide pass through a staff of 8 people, some of them from the Bellevue Crown, including Denise, who had submitted what she called her formal application on a piece of notebook paper that simply read, I want to work somewhere that matters, D. Jordan had framed it and hung it in the back office. The wall near the entrance had a single piece of framed text, not a quote from anyone famous, Not a mission statement in corporate language, just a sentence handwritten by a 9.5-year-old on a Saturday morning with a blue marker transferred to print and placed where everyone who came in would see it before they did anything else. No one enters this room more important than anyone else. People stopped at it. Every day, multiple times, someone would come through the door and pause at that sentence and stand with it for a moment. Some of them would smile. Some of them would look away quickly, the way people look away from things that have landed somewhere real. A few over the months had asked Jordan about it. He always told them his daughter wrote it. They always looked at him with a specific expression, the expression of someone recalibrating what they expected the story to be. He had learned to like that expression. The restaurant became known in the neighborhood before it became known anywhere else, which was exactly how Jordan had hoped it would happen. The regulars came first, the people who lived within walking distance, who had heard about it from someone who had been there and said something simple and true, the way recommendations travel when they're genuine. Then the coverage came a piece in a local publication that was written by a journalist who had actually eaten there 3 times before she wrote a word, and then a larger piece from a national outlet that had followed Jordan's story through the settlement and wanted to write about what happened after. Jordan had agreed to the interview on one condition, that the piece would be about the restaurant and the people who worked in it. Not about Victor Whitmore, not about the legal history, not about the dramatic arc of a comeback narrative. The journalist had agreed. She had kept her word. The piece ran on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the reservation line had a 3-week wait. Jordan did not change anything. The menu stayed the same. The staff stayed the same. The 32 seats stayed 32 seats. He did not expand quickly because he had learned in a previous life, in a very different kind of building, that the fastest way to ruin something good was to scale it before you understood what made it good. He was patient. That was the one thing that had never changed about him. Marcus came in for dinner on the 2nd month with his wife. Jordan came out from the kitchen to say hello because Marcus had not told him he was coming, and Jordan would have been legitimately offended if he'd found out afterward. Marcus looked around the dining room. He looked at the wall. He looked at the kitchen pass-through and at the staff moving with the particular ease of people who genuinely liked where they worked. "You did it," Marcus said. "We did it," Jordan said. "Denise is running the floor." Marcus looked at Denise across the room, who was talking to a table with the natural authority of someone who had found the place where their capabilities fit the work. "She's different here," Marcus said. "She was always this," Jordan said. "She just needed the right room." Marcus looked at him. "That's what you did, isn't it?" he said. "You built the right room." Jordan thought about it. "I tried," he said. "That's all you can do. Try to build the right room and then trust the people in it to make it real." Marcus's wife, a warm, quiet woman named Diane, who had heard enough about Jordan over 3 years to feel she already knew him, put her hand briefly on Jordan's arm. "He talked about you every night," she said, "when he'd come home from the restaurant. Jordan did this, Jordan said that, every night." Marcus looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man caught in affection and not entirely comfortable with it. "She exaggerates," he said. "I have receipts," Diane said. Jordan laughed. "Let me get you a good table." Amara started 5th grade that September with the knowledge, comfortable and matter-of-fact, in the way that children internalize things when they're explained honestly and early, that her father had built something important, had given it up for her, and had then built something else. She did not perform this knowledge. She didn't bring it up to impress anyone or to defend against the lingering edges of what had been said about her father online, which had been corrected and had faded. She just carried it the way she carried everything her father had given her, as a permanent part of the foundation she stood on. On the Friday night of the restaurant's 4th month, she came in after school. Jordan had arranged with Mrs. Calloway to drop her off and sat at the small corner table that had quietly become her spot with her mystery book and her homework. And she did what she always did in this space. She existed in it comfortably, as if the room had been built with her in mind, which in a way it had. Jordan came out from the kitchen between the prep rush and the dinner service and sat across from her for 15 minutes. This was a ritual he protected aggressively. 15 minutes every Friday in the restaurant before the real evening began. "How was school?" he asked. "Gerald level interesting," she said. "Priya and I figured out who took the markers from the art room." "Who?" "The 3rd grade teacher, by accident. She put them in her bag thinking they were hers. We presented the evidence to the principal." Jordan stared at her. "You presented evidence." "It was circumstantial but compelling," Amara said entirely seriously. "She didn't get in trouble. We weren't trying to get her in trouble. We just wanted the markers back. And we got them back." She returned to her book. "Gerald would have solved it faster, but Gerald doesn't have to raise his hand before speaking." Jordan sat with this for a moment. "Amara," he said. Are you happy?" She looked up. The question had landed differently than the usual rhythm of their conversation, and she recognized it. She looked at him with those eyes, her mother's eyes, the eyes he had fallen in love with before Amara was born, and which he found every day both heartbreaking and miraculous in his daughter's face. "Yes," she said, simply. "Are you?" He looked around the room, at the 32 seats filling slowly with people who had chosen to be here, at Denise moving through the floor with the ease of someone at home in their work, at the sentence on the wall his daughter's handwriting transformed into something permanent. He thought about a restaurant in Chicago where a man had mocked his shoes and asked him how many years before he could afford to sit at the table. He thought about a butter knife placed on a tablecloth. He thought about 5 words spoken in a voice that didn't shake, because he had decided a long time ago exactly who he was, and nothing that happened in that room was going to change it. He thought about a legal pad filled with 12 pages of truth, about a phone call to a lawyer he had once paid in quarterly installments, about a conference room and a handshake, and a man who had spoken his name in public, because in the end even men like Victor Whitmore contained somewhere within them the faint signal of something that knew the difference between right and wrong. He thought about 14 months of building the right room. I thought about his daughter's sentence on the wall. He thought about his father's voice. "The one thing nobody can take from you is the work you actually did." "Yes," Jordan said. "I'm happy." She nodded as if this was the correct answer and returned to her book. He sat across from her for the rest of the 15 minutes, not saying anything, just being in the room with her. And then the dinner service started, and he stood up and buttoned his jacket and went to work, not because he had to, not because there was nothing else available to him, but because this was the work he had chosen, the room he had built, the life he had constructed from the ground up by hand, from the things that remained when everything else was taken away. And the things that remained, it turned out, were more than enough. They had always been more than enough. He just hadn't been in a position until now to build the room that showed it. The uniform had never made him small. The table had never made Victor greater. And the man that everyone in that restaurant had looked past, the man carrying plates, the man in the worn shoes, the man who had built the foundation. Someone else stood on. That man had known who he was every single day of every single year. He had never needed a crown. He had always been the king.